the role that gets applause. By the time anyone notices her, she is already doing it well. She has learned the timing, the tone, the way to step in before anyone asks. She knows how to read a room and sense what's missing, what's needed, who might fall apart if she doesn't hold things together. It doesn't look like effort from the outside. It looks like competence, grace, reliability. People use words like strong, thoughtful, generous. Sometimes they say she's the kind of person you can always count on. Sometimes they say they don't know how she does it all. She smiles at that. She has practiced that smile. It lands softly. It doesn't ask for anything back. This role didn't arrive all at once. It grew slowly, almost invisibly shaped by moments that felt small at the time. Saying yes when it would have been easier to say no. Staying a little longer. Listening a little harder. Letting something go because it wasn't worth the trouble. Over time, those choices stacked on top of each other until they formed something solid, something recognizable. A version of her that people came to expect. A version that worked. There is comfort in being needed. There is safety in being the one who doesn't cause problems. The one who can be trusted to keep things smooth. She knows how quickly warmth disappears when expectations are broken. She has seen what happens when someone steps out of line, when they disappoint, when they take up too much space. So she learned how not to do that. She learned how to stay on the right side of things. At first, it even felt like a relief. There is a kind of peace that comes from knowing your place, from knowing what's required of you. The rules are unspoken, but they are clear. Be kind, be reasonable, be flexible. Don't make it about you. She followed them well, and the world responded. Doors stayed open. Relationships stayed intact. She was welcomed, appreciated, sometimes admired. And yet there are moments when the applause fades and the room goes quiet. Moments when she is alone again driving home or standing in the kitchen late at night and something inside her loosens just enough to be felt. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't demand attention. It's more like a pause that lingers a second too long. A breath she forgets to take. A sense that something has been set down somewhere along the way and never picked back up. She doesn't think of it as a problem. That word feels too dramatic, too sharp. Problems are things you fix. This feels different. This feels like a background hum she has grown used to, like the sound of a refrigerator running in the next room. You only notice it when everything else goes still. The role keeps moving forward whether she thinks about it or not. There are messages to answer, plans to confirm, needs to anticipate. Someone always needs reassurance. Someone always needs her steadiness. And she gives it because that's what she does. Because that's who she is. Or at least who she has learned to be. People trust her with their worries. They hand her their frustrations, their doubts, their unfinished thoughts. She holds them carefully, responds, thoughtfully makes space. She rarely hands her own back. Not because she has nothing to say, but because it doesn't seem necessary. Because there never seems to be the right moment. Because things are fine, really. Good even. She tells herself that often. She tells herself she's lucky. There is a certain pride in being the one who can handle things. She doesn't deny that. It feels good to be capable, to be the anchor when others drift. She remembers times when being needed made her feel visible in a way nothing else did. When someone's relief at her presence felt like proof that she mattered. That kind of proof is hard to give up. But proof can also become a trap. Not in an obvious way. Not with chains or walls. More like a narrow path you keep walking because turning around would raise questions. Because stepping off would mean explaining yourself, and explaining yourself has never been easy. Especially when you don't have a clean explanation. Especially when the role has given you so much. Sometimes she wonders when it stopped feeling like a choice. She can't pinpoint the moment. There was no clear line, no dramatic turning point. Just a gradual shift, like the way a favorite sweater stretches out of shape after being worn too often. It still looks fine. It still does its job. But it doesn't fit the same way anymore. She notices it in small things. The way her shoulders tighten when someone thanks her for always being so understanding. The way her chest feels a little hollow when she's praised for being low maintenance. The way she hesitates before answering a simple question about what she wants. These moments pass quickly. She moves on. There's always something else to focus on. The world rewards consistency. It likes knowing who you are. It likes predictability. And she's become very good at offering that. She knows which parts of herself land well and which ones cause confusion. She knows which opinions to soften, which needs to delay, which reactions to swallow. She doesn't experience this as dishonesty. It feels more like consideration, like maturity, like love. And yet there is a difference between being considerate and disappearing quietly. A difference that is hard to name when you are praised for both. When people tell you how easy you are, how adaptable, how grateful they are that you don't make things complicated. Those words sound kind. They are meant to be kind, but they also carry weight. They shape the space you're allowed to occupy. She rarely talks about the effort it takes to stay in that space, the constant monitoring, the quick calculations. If I say this, how will it land? If I don't respond now, will they think something's wrong? If I step back, will they still be okay? These questions move through her quietly, efficiently, like background processes running on a computer. She doesn't stop to examine them. She just keeps going. There are times when she imagines what it would be like to not do this, to not anticipate, to not manage, to let something fall where it may. The thought feels both tempting and unsettling. She doesn't linger there long. It feels irresponsible, self-indulgent. She has obligations. People count on her. This is what adults do. This is what good women do. The role has a history. It didn't appear out of nowhere. It was shaped by family dynamics, by early praise, by lessons learned without being taught. She remembers being told she was so mature for her age, so easy, so helpful. She remembers the approval that came with that, the sense of belonging. She learned quickly which version of herself kept the peace. Over time, that version became familiar enough to feel like home, or at least like a place she knew how to survive. She stopped questioning it. She stopped wondering what else might exist beyond it. There was no need. Life was full, busy, structured. The role gave her direction, but direction is not the same as presence. And there are moments now, more frequent than before, when she feels slightly off-center inside her own life. As if she's watching herself perform something she learned a long time ago, even as another part of her sits quietly in the back waiting. That waiting doesn't look dramatic. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand change. It's more like a steady pressure, a sense of weight that doesn't lift even after a good night's sleep or a successful day. She notices it when she's praised and feels nothing, when she does everything right and still feels strangely absent. She tells herself she's overthinking. She tells herself everyone feels this way sometimes. She reminds herself of all the reasons she should be satisfied. And for the most part, that works. The feeling recedes. The role holds. Still, there is something unsettling about being loved for a version of yourself that never fully rests. About being appreciated for qualities that require constant adjustment. She hasn't said this out loud. She isn't even sure how she would. It sounds ungrateful, dramatic, and she doesn't want to be that. So she keeps showing up as expected. She keeps earning the applause. She keeps the rhythm going. From the outside, nothing changes. From the inside, there is a quiet accumulation, a sense that something is being asked of her that no one has named, including herself. The role everyone loves continues to work beautifully. It just doesn't ask whether she still fits inside it. And for now, she doesn't ask either. She feels the question hovering somewhere nearby, unformed, patient. It doesn't rush her. It knows she will hear it eventually. What the role requires. No one ever hands her a list. There is no contract, no moment where the expectations are laid out clearly. That's part of why it works so well. She learns by watching, by noticing what gets rewarded and what gets quietly corrected. A raised eyebrow, a change in tone, a pause where warmth used to be. She adjusts without thinking about it. She always has. The role asks for her attention first. Not all at once, not in a way that feels invasive. Just little checks throughout the day. Is everyone okay? Did that land wrong? Should I follow up? It's a constant low-level awareness, like keeping one ear open even while trying to rest. She doesn't call it vigilance. She calls it being considerate. It asks her to be available, not necessarily physically, but emotionally, to be the one who responds quickly, the one who remembers details, the one who notices when something shifts and moves to smooth it over before it becomes a problem. She's learned how to read between the lines of a short text, a delayed reply, a distracted look. She fills in the gaps so others don't have to. The role also asks her to edit herself. Nothing drastic, just small refinements. She learns which stories to tell and which to shorten, which opinions to soften, which reactions to hold back. It's not that she's pretending, it's more that she's curating, choosing the version of herself that fits the moment best, the version that won't disrupt the flow. She's especially careful with anything that might be seen as inconvenient. Fatigue, doubt, wanting more time, wanting something different. Those things tend to complicate conversations. They introduce questions, and questions can feel risky when you've built a life around being easy to be with. The role asks for flexibility. Plans change, and she adapts. Someone forgets, and she understands. Someone needs more, and she stretches. She tells herself, this is what partnership looks like. This is what love looks like. This is what maturity looks like. She has plenty of examples to back that up. Over time, she becomes skilled at anticipating what others need before they say it. She offers solutions before complaints form. She reassures before doubt has a chance to grow. People come to rely on this. They trust her to hold the emotional temperature steady. They trust her not to make things messy. What the role doesn't ask for, at least not directly, is her honesty in its raw form. It prefers clarity, but only after it's been filtered. It prefers openness, but only if it doesn't disrupt the balance. She learns this without being taught. She learns it by watching how quickly things shift when she steps outside those boundaries. There have been moments, small ones, times when she almost said what she was really thinking, times when she felt something sharp rise up and had to decide whether to let it show. Usually she chooses not to, not because she's afraid of conflict exactly, but because she's aware of the cost. She's seen how quickly people pull back when the version of her they rely on wavers. The role requires consistency. Being steady means being predictable. It means not changing too much, not too fast. It means staying close enough to who people think you are that they don't have to recalibrate. She understands this intuitively. Change asks others to adjust, and adjustment can feel like a burden. She doesn't think of herself as someone who disappears. She's still there, still present, still engaged. But there are parts of her that have learned to wait, parts that know it's not their turn, parts that have learned to stay quiet because their timing never seems quite right. The role also requires gratitude for being included, for being appreciated, for being needed. Gratitude keeps things smooth. Gratitude keeps you on the inside. She has learned how to express it easily, sincerely. She is grateful, and sometimes that gratitude makes it harder to question anything. It feels wrong to want something else when so much has been given. There's a rhythm to all of this, a pace she's grown used to. Respond, adjust, hold, repeat. It becomes automatic. She doesn't wake up each day deciding to do it. She just does. And because she does it well, there's little reason for anyone to ask how it feels on her end. The role requires her to stay composed, even when she's unsure, even when she's overwhelmed. She knows how to keep her voice level, her expressions neutral. She knows how to keep things moving. Composure is praised. It signals capability. It tells the world she can handle what's in front of her. She rarely lets herself imagine what would happen if she didn't, if she paused instead of responding, if she said she wasn't sure, if she admitted she didn't have the energy. Those moments feel hypothetical, distant. She tells herself she can always do that later, when things are less busy, when the timing is better. But the role doesn't come with an off switch. It doesn't announce when it's asking too much. It just keeps asking in the same quiet way it always has. And because she's been meeting those requests for so long, it's hard to know where the line is anymore. She notices it in her body before she names it in her mind. The tightness that doesn't fully go away. The way she exhales a little deeper when she's finally alone. The way silence feels heavier than it used to. These are not dramatic signals. They're easy to dismiss. She tells herself she just needs rest, a break, a weekend to reset. But even in those moments of rest, the role lingers. She checks in, she thinks ahead, she plans her return. Being away doesn't mean being free. It just means doing the same thing at a lower volume. What the role requires more than anything is her agreement. Not spoken, but assumed. An ongoing consent she never remembers giving. It's built into the way people talk to her, the way they rely on her reactions staying familiar. It's built into the way she introduces herself, the way she moves through rooms. There are benefits, of course: stability, belonging, a sense of being known. She's not blind to that. She knows this role has protected her in many ways. It has kept her connected. It has given her a place. She doesn't resent it. Not exactly. What unsettles her is the realization that the role doesn't ask whether it still fits. It doesn't check in. It assumes continuity. And because it's been reinforced for so long, stepping back feels like a disruption, not just to others, but to the structure of her own life. She wonders sometimes who she would be if the role loosened its grip, not in a dramatic, life-altering way, just in small moments. Would she speak differently, move differently, choose differently? The thought feels abstract, almost theoretical. She doesn't chase it. There's too much to do. The role also requires her silence in certain places. Not total silence, but selective. There are things she knows not to bring up, topics that change the energy, feelings that complicate the dynamic. She learns how to sense when it's better to let something go. She's very good at letting things go. Over time, that skill becomes second nature. She lets go before she fully registers what she's releasing. It feels efficient, practical. She tells herself it's not worth the trouble. She tells herself it doesn't matter that much. But the things she lets go of don't disappear. They accumulate quietly. They settle somewhere inside her, unexpressed, unacknowledged. Not as complaints, but as weight. A sense that she is carrying more than is visible. The role doesn't demand perfection, it just prefers reliability. Showing up, staying steady, not rocking the boat. She meets that standard easily. Too easily, perhaps. There's no clear signal when she's gone beyond it. She starts to notice that her life feels carefully managed, balanced on the surface, but requiring constant adjustment underneath. Like holding a tray full of glasses, always aware that one wrong move could send everything sliding. She keeps her hands steady. She doesn't complain about the strain. People tell her how calm she is, how grounded, how she always seems to know what to do. She nods, thanks them. She doesn't correct them. She doesn't tell them how much of that calm is maintained through effort, through restraint, through choosing not to say what would make things less smooth. What the role requires is not cruelty. It doesn't ask her to hurt herself outright. It just asks her to keep going as she has been, to not question the arrangement, to not disrupt the pattern, to stay recognizable. And she does, day after day, because it works, because it's familiar, because stepping out would require a different kind of courage one she hasn't named yet. For now, she stays where she is, fulfilling what's expected, holding things together. But somewhere beneath the rhythm of it all, a quiet awareness is forming. Not a decision, not a plan, just a noticing, a sense that the role asks for more than it used to. Or maybe it always asked for this, and she's only now feeling the weight of it. She doesn't know what to do with that awareness yet. She doesn't have to. The role continues uninterrupted. The days move forward. She shows up steady as ever, and inside that steadiness, something is slowly, patiently taking note. The quiet cost. No one thanks it, doesn't arrive as a crisis. There's no breakdown, no moment where everything stops working. If anything, the days keep flowing smoothly. Tasks get completed, messages get answered, responsibilities are met. From the outside, it still looks like balance. That's what makes the cost so hard to notice. It hides inside functionality. She begins to sense it in the pauses between things, in the seconds after she hangs up a call and doesn't immediately move on to the next task, in the space between arriving home and doing whatever comes next. There's a slight delay now, like her body needs a moment longer to catch up with itself. She stands still without meaning to, just long enough to feel the weight settle. No one asks about that weight. There's no reason to. It doesn't show. It hasn't disrupted anything, and she hasn't named it, not even to herself. Naming would imply importance, and she's learned subtly but thoroughly what counts as important. The cost shows up in how she measures her days, not by what she experienced, but by what she managed. Did everything get handled? Did anyone leave upset? Did anything fall apart? When the answer is no, she tells herself it was a good day, even if she can't remember a single moment from it that felt like her own. She notices that her energy has a direction now. It flows outward, toward others, toward maintaining what already exists. There's very little left over at the end of the day, but she doesn't see that as a problem. That's just how it is. Everyone's tired. Everyone's busy. She reminds herself of that when she feels the quiet depletion set in. There are things she used to do without thinking that now feel heavier. Small decisions take longer. Conversations linger in her mind after they're over. She replays them not because anything went wrong, but because she's checking. Did I say too much? Did I say too little? Did that sound right? It's a habit she barely notices anymore. The role has trained her to stay alert even when nothing is happening. Even when she's alone, she keeps an internal list running, a sense of what's pending, what might need attention soon. Rest doesn't fully rest when part of her is still on standby. She doesn't talk about this, partly because she doesn't know how. Complaints need a shape. They need a story. This doesn't have one. It's not one big thing. It's 1,000 small adjustments, each reasonable on its own, that together leave her feeling slightly out of sync with herself. When people thank her, she feels a brief lift. Gratitude still matters to her. It confirms that her efforts land somewhere that they're noticed. But the lift fades quickly now. The thanks doesn't reach as deep as it used to. It skims the surface and moves on. She doesn't mention that either. It feels petty, ungrateful. The cost also appears in how quickly she downplays her own limits. If she's tired, she tells herself it's nothing. If she's overwhelmed, she reframes it as a busy week. She's become fluent in minimizing herself. Not out of self-denial, but out of practicality. There's always more to do. She begins to realize that there's no clear moment when she's allowed to stop. No signal that says enough has been given. The role doesn't include a finish line. It just keeps extending. As long as she keeps meeting expectations, those expectations quietly expand. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes with this. Not the absence of people, but the absence of being met. She's surrounded by relationships, by conversations, by activity. And yet there are times when she feels oddly unseen, even as she's deeply involved. As if the part of her that's most present is the part doing the work, not the part doing the living. She doesn't blame anyone for this. No one asked her to disappear. No one told her not to speak. She made choices. She knows that. That knowledge complicates everything. It keeps her from feeling wronged. It keeps her from feeling entitled to more. The cost is also time. Not in the obvious sense. She still has a full calendar. She still shows up. But time starts to feel flatter. Days blend together. Weeks pass without leaving much of an impression. She marks them by obligations rather than experiences. She catches herself saying she can't remember the last time she felt fully present somewhere without also monitoring how it was going. Even moments meant to be relaxing carry a low hum of awareness. Is everyone okay? Is this working? Do I need to adjust anything? The questions never fully turn off. Sometimes she wonders if this is just adulthood, if this is what maturity actually looks like once the early ideals wear off. She's heard others talk about it this way, about responsibility, about sacrifice, about putting things before yourself. She's good at that. She's always been. But there's a difference between choosing sacrifice and never revisiting the choice, between caring for others and slowly losing track of where you end. She hasn't articulated that difference, but she feels it. It shows up as a vague dissatisfaction she can't quite justify. The cost isn't dramatic enough to demand attention. That's part of its power. It's easy to ignore something that doesn't hurt sharply, something that doesn't disrupt, something that can always be postponed. She notices it when she's asked a simple question like, "What do you want to do?" and her mind goes blank. Not because she doesn't want anything, but because she's so used to considering the context first. What makes sense? What's easiest? What works for everyone? Her own preference comes last, if at all. She laughs it off when it happens, makes a joke about being indecisive. She doesn't say that it feels like reaching for something that used to be closer, easier to access. She doesn't say that sometimes she feels oddly distant from her own responses. The cost also touches her body. She carries tension without noticing it, in her jaw, in her shoulders, in the way she holds herself slightly braced even when nothing is wrong. She's adapted to that posture. It feels normal now. On rare occasions when she's truly alone and unobserved, she feels a wave of fatigue that surprises her with its depth. Not the kind that sleep fixes, the kind that feels like it's been building for a long time. She sits with it briefly, then moves on. There's no time to unpack it. What's hardest to admit, even internally, is that the role doesn't just take from her. It also shields her. As long as she's busy managing, she doesn't have to ask herself harder questions. She doesn't have to confront the possibility that she might want something different, something that doesn't fit as neatly. The cost then is not only what she gives up, but what she delays. The parts of her that might have spoken move chosen differently. They wait, patiently. They're not angry. they're just quiet. She senses them more clearly now, those waiting parts. In moments when she feels disconnected from conversations she's fully participating in. In moments when she hears herself agreeing and feels a slight lag inside, like her words arrived before her consent. She still tells herself, this is fine, that nothing is wrong enough to warrant attention, that this is just the texture of a full life. And maybe that's true. Maybe this is simply the cost of being someone others can rely on. But the question isn't whether there's a cost. That's becoming harder to deny. The question is whether it will always be this quiet, whether it will continue to be absorbed silently unnoticed by everyone but her. For now, she keeps going. The role still functions, the systems hold. She shows up steady as ever. And the cost continues to accrue not as resentment, not as anger, but as a growing sense of distance from something she can't quite name. It doesn't demand action yet. It doesn't even demand acknowledgement. It just exists, waiting, like a bill that hasn't been opened but keeps arriving all the same. Moments when stepping away is considered. The thought doesn't arrive as a plan. It shows up more like a flicker brief and easy to dismiss. A pause before answering. A moment of hesitation where her body leans one way and her words go another. She notices it, then moves past it the way you do with something that feels impractical. These moments tend to appear when she's already done enough, when she's given what was asked, and then a little more. Someone suggests one more thing, one more adjustment, one more favor, and she feels that familiar tightening. Usually she overrides it without thinking. This time she notices the override itself, that noticing changes something even if nothing else does. Stepping away doesn't mean leaving, not yet. It's more subtle than that. It's the idea of not responding right away, of letting a message sit unanswered for longer than feels polite, of saying maybe instead of yes, of letting someone else fill the space she usually occupies. These are small things, almost invisible, but to her, they feel charged. She runs through the implications quickly, efficiently. If I don't step in, will it still get done? If I don't smooth this over, will it become awkward? If I don't offer reassurance, will they feel abandoned? These questions have always guided her actions. Now they come with an extra layer. What happens to me if I don't? That question doesn't have an answer. It's not even fully formed. It's just there hovering at the edge of her awareness. She doesn't pursue it. Pursuing questions like that can lead to places she doesn't have time to explore. There are moments when she imagines herself saying no and watches the scene play out in her mind. The look on someone's face, the slight confusion, the recalibration. She imagines the silence afterward, the space she would have to sit in without filling it. The image makes her uneasy. Silence has never been her strength. She's built her life around continuity, around being someone others can rely on without thinking twice. Stepping away even briefly feels like introducing a variable into a system that's been carefully balanced, and she's the one who usually maintains that balance. Letting go of that role even momentarily feels risky. Sometimes the thought shows up when she's already overwhelmed, when her schedule is tight and another request comes in framed casually as if the answer is obvious. She feels the familiar reflex to agree to make it work somehow. Then she feels something else alongside it. A resistance that doesn't harden into refusal but doesn't dissolve either. She might say she'll get back to them. That's new. Or she might say she's not sure yet. The words feel strange in her mouth, like a language she hasn't practiced enough to speak fluently. She watches how people respond. Most of the time, nothing dramatic happens. The world doesn't collapse. But the moment lingers inside her longer than she expects. She notices how quickly guilt rushes in during these moments. Not sharp or loud, just present. A sense that she's letting someone down, that she's being difficult, that she's disrupting something that didn't need to be disrupted. She recognizes that feeling immediately. It's familiar. She's learned how to manage it. What's new is the way she doesn't immediately dismiss it. She lets it sit just for a moment. She notices how it pulls at her, how it tries to guide her back into compliance. She notices how often it's been the deciding factor in the past. That noticing feels significant, even if it doesn't lead to a different choice yet. There are other moments too, quieter ones. When she's alone and considers how she spends her time. When she realizes how many decisions are made with others in mind first. When she catches herself rearranging her schedule to avoid disappointing someone, even though no one explicitly asked her to, she considers what it would be like to choose differently in those moments, to prioritize her own rhythm, to protect her energy. The thought feels self-centered in a way she's been taught to avoid. She doesn't label it that way consciously, but the discomfort is there. Choosing herself feels like stepping out of alignment with something larger. She has always believed that being good meant being responsive, being flexible, being willing to adapt. That belief has served her well. It has kept her connected. It has made her valuable. Questioning it feels like questioning the foundation of how she moves through the world. And yet, there's a growing sense that something about that equation is incomplete. That responsiveness without boundaries slowly turns into something else. That flexibility without pause becomes exhaustion. She doesn't articulate this as a rule or a realization. It's more like a pattern she's beginning to see from the inside. There are moments when others assume she'll take care of something without checking, when they speak as if her agreement is already given. She notices how easily that assumption slides into place. She notices how rarely she challenges it, not because she has to say yes, but because saying no would require a conversation she doesn't feel prepared for. Preparedness has always mattered to her. She likes knowing how things will go. She likes having the right words ready. Stepping away would mean entering a space where she doesn't know how she'll be received, where she might be misunderstood. That possibility makes her cautious. Sometimes she tries stepping away in small, private ways. She delays a response. She chooses not to explain herself fully. She lets someone else handle something she would usually take on. These moments feel experimental, tentative. She watches them closely, gauging the impact. Often the impact is minimal. People adjust. Things move forward. The system absorbs the change. That surprises her. She expected more friction, more fallout. The absence of it leaves her with an unfamiliar feeling. Relief, maybe, or curiosity, or something like both. Still, she doesn't rush toward change. She doesn't declare anything. She doesn't make announcements. The idea of doing so feels excessive. She prefers subtle shifts, quiet recalibrations that don't draw attention. She's not trying to disrupt anyone's life. She's just noticing her own. There are moments when stepping away feels less like a choice and more like a necessity. When her body signals before her mind does. When she feels an urge to pull back to create space to sit with herself without managing anything. These urges pass quickly, but they leave an impression. She notices how often she's been moving toward others without checking whether she's moving away from herself. That thought lands softly. It doesn't accuse. It just sits there waiting. The role she's played has taught her to be outward-facing, to measure herself by how well things run, how satisfied others are. Turning inward, even briefly, feels disorienting. There's no clear metric, no immediate feedback. She doesn't know how she's doing in that space. Sometimes she wonders who she would disappoint if she stepped back more fully. The list forms quickly in her mind. Family, partners, colleagues, friends. The people who rely on her steadiness. The people who see her as a certain kind of person. She wonders whether disappointing them would change how they see her, whether it would change how she sees herself. That question lingers longer than she expects. It doesn't push her toward action. It just stays with her, a quiet companion during ordinary moments. She thinks about it while doing dishes, while driving, while answering emails. It weaves itself into the fabric of her days. She realizes that stepping away isn't just about time or energy. It's about permission, about whether she's allowed to take up space in a different way, whether she's allowed to be less available without becoming less valued. Those questions feel bigger than she's ready to answer. She's not seeking a dramatic transformation. She's not imagining a life turned upside down. What she's considering is much smaller, and maybe because of that, more unsettling. A shift in how she relates to her own needs, a willingness to let others feel the gap when she doesn't fill it. There's a moment that stays with her. Someone thanks her for always being there, for never making things difficult. She smiles as she always does, but this time the words land differently. She hears the unspoken part, the expectation embedded in the praise. She doesn't resent it, she just hears it. Afterward, she finds herself wondering what would happen if she did make things difficult. Not out of spite, just out of honesty. The thought feels heavy, almost taboo. She doesn't entertain it for long, but she doesn't forget it either. Stepping away remains a consideration, not a decision. It lives in the background of her awareness, surfacing at unexpected times. It doesn't demand resolution. It doesn't insist on clarity. It's patient. It knows she's not ready to act on it fully. What changes is not her behavior, at least not in any obvious way. What changes is her attention. She starts to notice the moments when she overrides herself, the moments when she chooses ease over truth. She doesn't judge those choices, she just sees them more clearly. That clarity brings a different kind of tension. Not the kind that pushes her to act, but the kind that keeps her awake. The kind that makes familiar patterns feel slightly less comfortable, slightly less automatic. She continues to show up. She continues to fulfill the role. Nothing has fallen apart. No one has accused her of anything. From the outside, everything looks the same. Inside, there's a subtle shift, a growing awareness that stepping away is possible even if it's not yet practiced. She doesn't know where that awareness will lead. She doesn't need to. For now, it's enough that it exists, that it has a place in her thoughts, that it's no longer completely unthinkable. The moments when stepping away is considered remain just that. Moments, fleeting, incomplete. But they mark something important. A crack in the certainty that the role is the only way to belong. A quiet opening that doesn't rush her through it. She keeps moving forward, carrying both the role and the question. She doesn't try to resolve the tension between them. She lets it stay unresolved. She senses that this tension is doing something, even if she can't yet say what. And in that not knowing, in that pause between habit and possibility, the story continues unfinished, waiting for its next turn. The subtle shift in meaning. At first, nothing changes on the surface. She still shows up, still responds, still holds things together. If someone were to look closely at her life, they wouldn't see a break in the pattern. The structure remains intact. The same rhythms, the same responsibilities, the same steady presence. And yet something has shifted quietly beneath all of it. She begins to notice how words land differently now. Phrases she's heard 100 times start to carry new weight. When someone calls her dependable, she hears not just appreciation, but expectation. When she's praised for being easygoing, she hears how narrow that space really is. The compliments haven't changed, but her relationship to them has. Being good used to feel clean, clear. It meant doing what was needed, showing up when asked, keeping things smooth. It gave her a sense of direction, a way to measure herself. Now that clarity has blurred, the same actions that once felt affirming begin to feel ambiguous. She still does them, but she's more aware of what they require. She catches herself mid-motion sometimes in the middle of agreeing or adjusting and feels a slight hesitation. It's not resistance exactly, more like a question forming underneath the habit. She doesn't stop herself. She doesn't correct course, but she notices the gap between the action and the feeling that follows. The idea of goodness starts to split. There's the version she's lived by for years, the one rooted in accommodation and reliability. And then there's another less defined version, one that doesn't align as neatly with approval. She doesn't know what to call that version. She only knows it doesn't fit inside the old definition. She thinks about moments from her past differently now. Times when she stayed quiet to keep the peace. Times when she said yes because it was easier than explaining no. She used to see those moments as signs of maturity, of care. Now she sees them with more nuance, not as mistakes, but as choices made within a narrow frame. The shift isn't dramatic enough to provoke action. It doesn't tell her to change her life. It doesn't even tell her she should be unhappy. It simply makes it harder to take certain things at face value, to accept praise without also noticing the cost embedded in it, to perform goodness without feeling the strain of maintaining it. She starts to see how often her idea of being good has required her to be smaller, not invisible, but contained, measured, easy to digest. She realizes that many of the qualities she's celebrated for depend on her willingness to hold back parts of herself that don't fit neatly into the role. This realization doesn't come with anger. She doesn't feel betrayed. It comes with a kind of quiet seriousness, a sense that she's been living by a rule she never fully examined, a rule that once kept her safe but now feels increasingly restrictive. She notices how quickly she still moves to justify herself when she doesn't meet expectations, how instinctively she explains, apologizes, smooths. These habits haven't disappeared, but now she sees them as habits, not necessities. That distinction matters even if it hasn't changed her behavior yet. The shift in meaning shows up most clearly in private moments. when she reflects on her day and realizes that the moments she feels most alive aren't the ones where she's praised or needed. They're quieter, less visible, moments where she's not performing a role but simply inhabiting herself, however briefly. She doesn't linger on those moments. They're fleeting. But she remembers them. And in remembering them, she starts to question what she's been optimizing for all these years. Approval, harmony, stability. These are not bad things. They've given her a life that works. But are they enough? The question feels dangerous, not because of what it might lead to, but because of what it implies. That goodness, as she's understood it, might be incomplete. That there might be another way of being good that doesn't rely on constant self-adjustment. She doesn't know what that would look like. She's not sure she wants to find out. She becomes more aware of the moments when she acts out of obligation rather than choice. They feel similar on the surface, but internally they register differently now. Obligation carries weight. Choice carries energy. She notices which one is driving her more often. This awareness doesn't bring clarity, it brings complexity. The lines she once relied on to guide her behavior blur. Doing the right thing is no longer as straightforward. She finds herself pausing more often, not because she's unsure of what to do, but because she's unsure of why she's doing it. She realizes that being good has protected her from certain risks, from disapproval, from conflict, from the discomfort of being misunderstood. Letting go of that protection even partially feels like stepping into open air without knowing how solid the ground is. And yet staying within the old definition feels increasingly constricting. The role that once gave her a sense of self now feels like it's asking her to trade depth for stability. She doesn't frame it that way consciously. She just feels the tension between who she's been and who she might be becoming. She notices how often she's been praised for her endurance, for her ability to handle things without complaint. She starts to wonder what that praise would sound like if she stopped enduring so quietly, if endurance wasn't the measure of her goodness anymore. The shift in meaning also affects how she sees others. She becomes more attuned to the roles people play, the expectations they carry. She sees how often goodness is equated with self-erasure, especially for women. She doesn't turn this into a critique. She just notices it the way you notice a pattern once you've seen it enough times. She wonders when being good became synonymous with being agreeable, when kindness became inseparable from compliance. These questions don't come with answers. They don't demand resolution. They simply sit alongside her daily choices, making them feel less automatic. She still cares deeply. That hasn't changed. She still wants to be kind, to be supportive, to show up. The shift isn't about rejecting those values. It's about noticing how narrowly they've been defined in her life, how much they've required her to give without asking whether she has room to receive. She starts to feel a subtle grief for the parts of herself that learned to wait quietly, not a dramatic grief, more like a soft ache, a recognition that something has been deferred for a long time. She doesn't dwell on it. She acknowledges it and moves on. The role hasn't collapsed. The structure is still standing, but the meaning that once held it together has loosened. What used to feel like virtue now feels conditional. What used to feel like clarity now feels like a compromise she's only just beginning to see. She doesn't know what comes next. She's not planning a break. She's not preparing a speech. The shift in meaning doesn't point toward action. It points inward, toward a reassessment she hasn't finished. She goes on with her life carrying this new awareness quietly. It doesn't make her restless. It makes her more present, more attentive to the cost of her own goodness, more aware of the space between who she is and who she's expected to be. That space doesn't scare her yet. It intrigues her. It feels like a question she's allowed to hold without answering, a question that's slowly reshaping how she understands herself. The story hasn't turned outward. Nothing has changed that anyone else would notice. But inside her, the definition of being good is no longer fixed. It's moving, shifting, becoming something less certain, but more honest. And that shift, quiet as it is, changes everything that comes after. When being good stops feeling clean, there is a moment when something she has relied on for most of her life stops feeling neutral. It doesn't turn bad overnight. It doesn't announce itself as wrong. It simply loses its clarity. What once felt like the obvious right choice now comes with a faint aftertaste she can't ignore. Being good used to feel like standing on solid ground. She knew where she was. She knew how to move. There was a quiet confidence in that. Even when it required effort, the effort made sense. It pointed somewhere. Now that same effort leaves her feeling slightly unsettled, like she's walking on a surface that looks stable but shifts under her weight. She notices it most clearly after moments of agreement, when she says yes automatically and feels a brief internal lag afterward. Not regret exactly, more like a question that arrives too late to change anything. She didn't do anything wrong. She knows that. But something about the exchange doesn't sit as easily as it used to. The word good itself begins to feel imprecise, too broad, too accommodating. It covers so many behaviors that it's hard to tell what it actually means anymore. Being good has asked her to be patient, flexible, generous. It has also asked her to be quiet, adaptable, self-correcting. She's starting to notice how often those requests overlap. She finds herself replaying interactions differently now, not to criticize herself, but to understand what happened. She listens to her own voice in her memory, the way she softened something before saying it, the way she redirected a conversation away from what mattered to her. These patterns are familiar, but now they register as choices rather than instincts. There is discomfort in that realization. If these were choices, then they weren't inevitable. And if they weren't inevitable, then something else was possible. That thought doesn't energize her, it weighs on her. Possibility brings responsibility, and she isn't sure she's ready to carry that yet. Being good has also meant being consistent, showing up the same way regardless of how she feels. Lately, that consistency has started to feel like a performance she can't fully relax into. She's still convincing, still capable, but she's more aware of the distance between the role and her internal state. She notices how often she prioritizes the smooth outcome over the honest one. Not because she's hiding anything dramatic, but because honesty tends to complicate things. It introduces pauses, questions, reactions she can't predict. Being good as she's practiced it has minimized those variables. What unsettles her now is not the behavior itself, but the absence of space around it. There's no room to arrive differently on different days, no allowance for fluctuation. Being good has become a fixed shape, and she's expected to fit into it regardless of what's happening inside her. She remembers times when she felt proud of her ability to adapt, to rise to the occasion, to be whatever was needed. That adaptability once felt like strength. Now it feels like something that's been overused, stretched thin. Adaptation without recovery has started to feel like erosion. There's a growing awareness that being good has protected her from certain judgments, but also from certain truths. As long as she stayed within the role, she didn't have to confront the parts of herself that didn't fit neatly into it. She didn't have to explain contradictions, she didn't have to tolerate others' confusion. She starts to notice how quickly she reaches for explanations when she deviates even slightly. If she's less available, she offers a reason. If she doesn't respond right away, she apologizes. If she expresses uncertainty, she quickly reassures. These gestures are small, almost invisible, but they reveal how deeply ingrained the expectation of goodness has become. The cleanliness of being good depended on clarity, on knowing what was expected and meeting it. Now that clarity is fading, the expectations remain, but her internal alignment with them doesn't. She feels the friction more acutely even when she continues to comply. She wonders when goodness became something that required so much effort, when it stopped feeling like an expression of who she is and started feeling like a requirement she has to meet. She doesn't frame this as a betrayal. No one tricked her. She participated willingly. That makes the reckoning quieter, more complex. There are moments when she feels almost irritated by praise, not because it's undeserved, but because it reinforces a version of her she's growing tired of maintaining. She doesn't show that irritation. She accepts the compliment graciously. She knows how to do that. But internally, there's a slight resistance now. Being good has also shaped how others approach her. They assume her agreement. They speak as if her support is guaranteed. They're not trying to take advantage of her. They're responding to the pattern she's established. She understands that. And yet the ease with which her presence is assumed begins to feel heavy. She realizes that being good has made her predictable in ways that don't always serve her. Predictability creates comfort for others. It reduces uncertainty. But it also limits surprise. It leaves little room for her to change without explanation. The idea of being less predictable feels dangerous. Not because she fears conflict, but because unpredictability threatens the coherence of the role. It asks others to adjust their understanding of her. Adjustment creates friction. Friction has always been something she worked hard to avoid. She notices how much of her energy goes into maintaining continuity, into making sure there are no sharp edges, no disruptions. She's good at smoothing things over, at keeping momentum going. But momentum doesn't ask whether the direction still makes sense. The phrase being good starts to feel too small to hold the complexity of who she is becoming. It flattens her. It simplifies her. It reduces a living, changing person into a set of reliable behaviors. That realization lands quietly without drama. It feels true in a way that doesn't need justification. She begins to see how often goodness has been measured by her willingness to put herself second, how frequently care has been conflated with self-erasure. She doesn't reject care, she values it deeply. What she questions now is the assumption that care must always come at her expense. There's a subtle grief in this questioning, a sense of letting go of something that once felt safe. Being good was a way to belong, to be welcomed, to avoid exclusion. Challenging it even internally feels like loosening a thread she's depended on. She doesn't know what replaces it. She's not trying to define a new standard yet. She's simply acknowledging that the old one no longer feels sufficient. That acknowledgement alone feels significant. It changes how she experiences her own actions. She starts to feel the difference between kindness that feels grounded and kindness that feels obligatory, between generosity that flows naturally and generosity that's extracted through expectation. These distinctions aren't always clear in the moment. They become clearer afterward in reflection. Being good used to be her compass. Now the needle wobbles. It still points in familiar directions, but not with the same certainty. She finds herself checking in more often, asking herself questions she never needed to ask before. Do I want to do this? Am I choosing this? Or am I just continuing something that's already in motion? These questions don't always lead to different choices. Often she still does what she's always done, but the act of questioning changes the texture of the experience. It makes her more aware of the cost of maintaining goodness at all times. She notices that some people respond differently when she hesitates. They fill the silence quickly. They offer reassurance. They seem slightly unsettled by her pause. This isn't hostility. It's unfamiliarity. They're adjusting to a version of her that doesn't immediately smooth everything over. That adjustment makes her aware of how much emotional labor she's been doing quietly, how often she's anticipated others' needs to prevent discomfort. Stepping back from that even slightly reveals how much space she's been occupying on others' behalf. She doesn't frame this as a discovery of wrongdoing. There's no villain in this story. There's just a system that worked until it didn't. A set of behaviors that once aligned with her sense of self and now feel increasingly misaligned. Being good hasn't stopped working externally. People still respond positively. Relationships still function. The shift is internal. It's about congruence, about whether her actions still reflect her inner reality. She feels the strain of holding two truths at once. That being good has given her a life that functions, and that continuing to define herself solely through that lens is no longer sustainable. Holding both truths without resolving them creates a quiet tension that follows her through her days. She's not ready to abandon goodness. She's not even sure she wants to. What she's realizing is that goodness without self-consideration becomes something else, something that costs more than it gives. The cleanliness is gone because the simplicity is gone. There are too many variables now, too much awareness. She can't unknow what she's noticed. She can't return to a time when being good felt uncomplicated. This doesn't make her reckless. It makes her careful in a different way, more attentive to her own signals, more aware of the moments when she overrides herself out of habit rather than intention. She starts to sense that the question is no longer how to be good, but what kind of goodness she's willing to live inside. That question feels larger than any single decision. It touches everything. How she relates, how she gives, how she stays. For now, she doesn't answer it. She lets it remain open. She allows the discomfort of not knowing to coexist with the familiarity of the role she still plays. That coexistence is uneasy, but it's honest. When being good stops feeling clean, it doesn't immediately tell you what to do instead. It simply removes the ease of autopilot. It asks you to stay present with the tension rather than smoothing it away. She carries that tension quietly. She doesn't dramatize it, she doesn't share it widely. It becomes part of her inner landscape, reshaping how she understands herself and the choices she makes. The role still exists, the applause still comes, but something fundamental has shifted. Being good is no longer a destination, it's a question, one she's only just begun to ask. And that question doesn't demand an answer yet. It only asks that she keeps listening even when what she hears unsettles the story she's lived by for so long. The question that doesn't go away. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't interrupt her days or force a confrontation. It simply stays, quiet, persistent, like a low note humming beneath everything else. The question doesn't ask for an answer. It asks for attention. She notices it most when she's praised. When someone thanks her for being so understanding, so reliable, so easy to work with. The words still sound kind, but now they carry an echo, an unspoken follow-up that lingers after the conversation moves on. She doesn't argue with it. She doesn't correct it. She just hears it. The question shows up when she considers doing something differently and feels the familiar pull of hesitation. Not fear, exactly. More like an instinct to maintain continuity, to keep things as they are. She recognizes that instinct now. It's no longer invisible. That alone changes the texture of her days. She goes about her life much as she always has. She fulfills her responsibilities. She shows up for the people who matter to her. She isn't withdrawing or rebelling. But there's a subtle difference in how she experiences these moments. She's more aware of what she's choosing even when she chooses the same thing. The question sits with her during ordinary moments, while she's driving, while she's folding laundry, while she's waiting for a reply. It doesn't demand urgency. It doesn't escalate. It simply waits patient and steady, as if it knows it has time. She realizes that the question isn't about leaving or staying. It's not about changing her life or holding on to it. It's about something more precise, whether she can continue to be seen as good without disappearing quietly inside that goodness, whether she can allow herself to exist beyond the role she's been praised for. This is where the tension sharpens. Not outwardly, but internally, because the question touches something fundamental, her sense of herself as caring, as loyal, as someone who doesn't abandon others. She has built her identity around these values. They matter to her. Questioning how they've been lived feels risky. She doesn't want to become someone she doesn't recognize. She doesn't want to harden or withdraw or become indifferent. That fear is present even if she doesn't name it. It's part of why the question lingers rather than resolves. The stakes feel high even though nothing dramatic is happening. There are moments when she tries to dismiss the question, to tell herself she's overthinking, that everyone feels this way sometimes, that life is complicated and no path is perfect. These thoughts offer temporary relief, but they don't make the question disappear. It returns quietly unchanged. She notices how often she measures her actions by how they will be received, how reflexively she checks for impact before checking in with herself. This habit hasn't vanished, but now she sees it as a habit rather than a law. That distinction creates space, even if she doesn't fill it yet. The question becomes clearer over time, not through analysis, but through accumulation, through moments when she agrees and feels a faint sense of loss, through moments when she hesitates and feels a flicker of relief, through moments when she does nothing differently and still feels the shift inside. She realizes that the question isn't asking her to choose between being good and being honest. It's asking whether those two things truly have to be separate. That realization unsettles her more than a clear demand ever could, because it suggests a deeper recalibration, one that can't be rushed. She starts to sense that the version of goodness she's lived by was shaped in response to something, to expectations, to praise, to early lessons about what keeps relationships intact. It worked. It kept her connected. But it may not be the whole story. The question doesn't accuse her of living falsely. It doesn't shame her for the past. It acknowledges what the role gave her: safety, belonging, a place. At the same time, it asks whether she's allowed to evolve beyond it without losing everything that matters. This is where the tension becomes most alive, because the possibility of loss is real. She knows that stepping out of a familiar role can change dynamics. People may need to adjust. Some may not. She doesn't dramatize this, but she doesn't deny it either. The risk exists. She notices how much of her life has been oriented around minimizing risk, around maintaining stability. That orientation has served her well, but it has also narrowed the range of what feels possible. The question gently presses against that narrowing. There are moments when she imagines herself answering differently, not dramatically, just slightly, saying no without explaining, pausing without filling the space, letting someone else manage their own discomfort. These images don't feel empowering or triumphant. They feel quiet, uncertain, human. She doesn't rush toward them. She lets them be what they are. Possibilities, not commitments. The question isn't asking for action, it's asking for honesty, for a willingness to notice what happens inside her when she considers these shifts. She becomes more aware of the cost of not answering the question at all, of letting it hover indefinitely while continuing on autopilot. That cost isn't dramatic, it's subtle, a continued sense of distance, a quiet dulling. She recognizes it now because she's lived with it long enough. The question also changes how she listens to others. She notices when people speak from roles they've outgrown, when they describe lives that function but don't quite fit. She doesn't comment. She simply recognizes the pattern. It makes her feel less alone. She understands now that the question isn't a problem to solve, it's a companion for this phase of her life. It walks with her through her days, reshaping her awareness. It doesn't need resolution to be meaningful. She realizes that the most unsettling part of the question is not what it might require of her, but what it reveals. That she has a say. That she has been choosing all along, even when those choices felt automatic. That awareness brings both weight and possibility. She doesn't frame this as empowerment. It doesn't feel like a breakthrough. It feels like responsibility quietly returned to her. The responsibility to notice herself, to consider the alignment between her actions and her inner reality, to tolerate the discomfort of not knowing exactly how things will unfold. The question stays with her because it's honest. It doesn't offer reassurance. It doesn't promise ease. It doesn't guarantee that choosing herself will be rewarded or understood. It simply asks whether she's willing to remain present with herself as she is, rather than disappearing into a role that no longer fits cleanly. She continues to live her life. She doesn't withdraw her care. She doesn't abandon her commitments. But there's a subtle shift in where she places her attention. She starts listening inwardly with the same care she's always offered outwardly. That listening doesn't produce immediate clarity. It produces moments, small recognitions, a sense of grounding that comes not from certainty but from honesty. She begins to trust that staying with the question is better than rushing past it. The question that doesn't go away becomes a marker, a sign that something in her is awake, attentive, unwilling to be smoothed over. It doesn't demand she act against anyone. It only asks that she stop acting against herself without noticing. She carries the question into her days, letting it shape her awareness rather than her decisions. For now, that's enough. The story doesn't need a resolution to continue. It needs her presence. And she is present. Not dramatically, not perfectly, but more honestly than before. She knows now that the question will remain until she's ready to answer it in her own way, in her own time. She doesn't know what that answer will look like. She doesn't need to. The question isn't a threat. It's an invitation to stay awake inside her own life. That awareness doesn't free her from difficulty. It anchors her within it. And in that anchoring, something steadier begins to form. Not certainty, not answers, but a quiet authority that comes from no longer abandoning the question when it appears. She lets it stay, and the story moves forward not toward a conclusion, but toward a deeper inhabiting of herself moment by moment. There is no clear ending to this, no final declaration, no moment where everything resolves into certainty. Life doesn't work that way, and she knows it. What has changed is not the shape of her days, but the way she stands inside them. She is still capable, still caring, still reliable. Those qualities haven't disappeared. They don't need to. What has shifted is the source she draws them from. Less obligation, more presence, less reflex, more choice. She understands now that being good was never the problem. The problem was believing that goodness required her to leave herself behind. That belief shaped her life quietly, efficiently, without malice. And now, just as quietly, it's loosening. She doesn't replace it with a new rule. She doesn't adopt a different identity. She allows herself to remain undefined in this space, to listen, to notice, to pause. There will be moments when she still defaults to the old role. Moments when she smooths, adapts, agrees. She doesn't judge those moments. They are part of her history. They don't vanish overnight. What matters is that she notices when they happen and what they cost her. There will also be moments when she doesn't, when she lets a silence stand, when she allows disappointment to exist without fixing it, when she chooses not to explain herself fully. These moments won't be celebrated. They may not even be noticed, but they will be felt deeply by her. She is learning that authority doesn't come from control or certainty. It comes from staying with herself when it would be easier to disappear into what's expected, from tolerating the discomfort of being seen less clearly by others in order to see herself more clearly. This is not a transformation story. It's a presence story, about remaining where you are but no longer leaving yourself to maintain the appearance of harmony, about letting goodness become something lived from the inside, not performed for the outside. She knows now that she doesn't need permission to exist beyond a role. Permission was never something others could grant. It's something she practices quietly each time she stays present with her own experience. The world may not change in response. Some people will adjust, some won't. That uncertainty remains. What's different is that she no longer measures her worth by how seamlessly she fits into expectations. She measures it by her ability to remain with herself even when it's uncomfortable, especially then. There is a steadiness that comes from that, a groundedness that doesn't seek approval, a sense of being at home inside her own attention. She doesn't announce this shift. She doesn't need to. It shows up in how she moves, how she listens, how she pauses before responding, how she allows herself to take up space without explaining why. This is the aftertaste of the story. Not resolution, but presence. Not certainty, but authority. Not a new role, but a quieter, truer way of inhabiting the one she has. The question may never fully go away. That's not a failure. It's a sign that she's alive to herself, that she's listening. And as long as she continues to listen, the story remains open. Not unfinished, but ongoing. Lived rather than concluded. She stays. With herself. With the tension. With the quiet, knowing that she no longer needs to disappear to be good. That knowing doesn't need applause. It holds.